Sage Wanderer coming at you from my van down by the river. And welcome to another episode of Prepping 101. This one is about the Preppers Pantry. Preppers Pantry, Preppers Pantry. Try saying that 3 times fast. Preppers Pantry, Preppers Pantry. Never mind. I believe in keeping a pantry. Now, it's a little difficult since I live in a van down by the river. But I also have a storage unit, and I like to keep it stocked. So, but if you live in a regular home, there's usually enough space allotted to you to keep a fair amount of groceries put up. And when you start putting up groceries in any house, the more carried away you get with it, the more space becomes an issue. But I'd like to talk about keeping a pantry, some of the logical things that I've learned, in some cases the hard way, about storing food and keeping food and preserving food, and how's the best way to do it, how to save money doing it, and what's some mistakes to avoid. So I thought I would throw this video out here and share with you some of the things that I have learned down through the years in how to keep food and keep a pantry. Now, if you're my age, our parents and grandparents were survivors of the Great Depression, many of them, and World War II, where there was an immense amount of rationing. So wasting food in my family was a sin, and it's part of the reason why maybe I struggle with my weight a little bit, because I don't believe in wasting food. And so preserving it, keeping it, and doing things like rotating your pantry are things that our grandparents did naturally, because many of them came along before there was refrigeration and freezers. So, keeping food and preserving food through the winter and keeping a pantry well stocked was something that, a skill that they had to have knowledge of, but we've kind of lost the knowledge. So I thought I'd share with you what I know. Now, this stuff's readily available on YouTube and on Google. You can find this stuff out. There's some varying opinions, but let's talk about the most common way of preserving food, which is canning food. So what you've got here is just some generic chicken noodle soup. Now, back in the day, they used to have a can opener to open up these cans, but now they have a pull tab, so no can opener is required. Now, the thing about pull tabs, I've heard they don't last as long as regular cans. And I don't know, they haven't been around long enough for me to test their longevity. I do know this, a quick cursory look will show you that a can like these green beans, which is sealed on both ends and requires a can opener to open, or a trick of the trade. I know several ways to open a can without a can opener. We'll save that for a Prepping 101 hack. How to open a can without a can opener. But the ones that are the kind that you don't have a pull tab on, they have the same expiration date roughly as cans that don't. So the manufacturer is not giving you a longer expiration date. Since we're talking about that, let's talk about expiration dates. So this says best if used by September 14th, 2020. Which is roughly a little less than 2 years from today. So this one also says best by December 2019, which is, less than 2 years away, a little more than a year and a half. The reality is the actual safe time that you can be allowed to eat this without getting sick goes way beyond the best by date. The date that they put on here is best by. And what that means is that starting on about that date, you start to get some significant loss of quality of product. Little bit at first, but increasing as time goes on. Now, that's quality. In other words, that's taste, texture, and flavor, and also the nutritional value starts to slowly deteriorate over time. But this might be safe to eat if the can is intact and it's been stored properly for up to 10 years or more, and that I've I've watched videos of people eating canned food that have been around for a very, very long time. If it's not bulging at the sides or at the top, if the top still looks recessed and has these ridges and the ridges aren't popped out and this isn't popped out in the center and bulging in any way, if there isn't any rust along the bottom or the edges of the can, and when you squeeze it, the can seems solid, when you shake it, everything sounds right. In an emergency, I'd eat that no problem. I'd eat it no problem. The best by date is a suggestion where this is the maximum freshness. It starts to go downhill from there. But it doesn't mean you can't eat it. And from what I've heard, the ones that have the pull tabs don't last as long. But I don't mind, because chicken noodle soup and peaches don't last long around my place, because we eat them up pretty fast. Food my grown son likes to come by and eat. But anyway, he doesn't like, I don't think he really likes soup, but he can eat some peaches and pears, let me tell you. At any rate, so that's kind of the thing on canned goods. Now, when I first got into food pantry, you know, I hate to call it hoarding. It's not hoarding. It's being prepared and having enough food on hand so you don't live hand to mouth, literally. You have some wiggle room there and you have some food laid up. It's just kind of the way that I was raised, and that's how you're supposed to live, and you know, that's how you survive the winter in real survival situations, is having food put up for the winter and preparing for the rough times ahead. So when you have these canned goods in your pantry, what I do, and just seems like common sense, but so many people don't think about this, is that I do what's called rotating. So I have the cans that are the freshest, I put in the back. So when I get new cans and I'm replenishing my pantry, I put everything fresh in the back, and I pull everything that's in the back forward. So the stuff in the front is the oldest stuff, so I want to get it eaten before we get to the best buy date. Most things have a best buy date, canned goods, of 1 to 2 years. So theoretically, one could keep fresh, viable food when rotating. You could have 1 to 2 years of food laid back if you had the space. Now, you don't want to store this in a place where any of it can get wet or get moisture. You don't want to store canned goods in a place where there's extreme heat and extreme cold and variation and fluctuations. You keep it in room temperature. 50 degrees is perfect. You know, garages are perfect as long as it's not too hot in the summer, not too cold in the winter, depending on where you live and your temperature extremes. So keeping canned goods is it's the way our forefathers have always done it. Have done it for a very long time. Now, let's talk about staple foods that, when stored properly, are good for, well, let's just say pretty much forever. Honey. Real natural bees honey, it just never goes bad. The consistency changes, it might get crystallized, but you can heat it up with some warm water and you're back in honeyland. Sugar's the same way. Sugar never goes bad. Salt never goes bad. It may get back in its rock form from getting moist, but ultimately the salt, you can just break it up and bust it back up into its granules, and put it in a salt shaker, and you're good to go. So those things can be put up, lots of it. And you should put up salt, because salt isn't just for cooking and for flavor, but salt is also a preservative. And the way that we used to preserve food was by salt curing. And if there's anything in your freezer, if the lights go out and you want to save that and you can't eat it all at once, meat and things like that, having enough salt on hand to salt it down and to stop the bacterial growth and create salted meats and start the curing process. If you have that salt on hand, you're way ahead of everybody, and you'll get to use every bit of that food in your freezer even though the power is gone. So there's a lot of other things like, soy sauce in an unopened bottle. It lasts a really long time, maybe forever. Real maple syrup will last forever. So there's a lot of things that you can put up that you don't have to rotate as long as it's stored properly. And so when I first started doing this prepping, though, I made some mistakes, I didn't rotate my cans right, and I ended up with rusty and bulging cans and stuff I threw away because I didn't trust, and I didn't understand the expiration dates, and I threw things away that were still viable just because the expiration date had passed. But some of the biggest mistakes I made was by purchasing survival food. And one of those that I had a horrible experience with was MREs. I purchased a bunch of MREs. I put them in a Cordura duffel bag, and I stuck them in a closet in my bug out room stuff. And I had a bug out bag that had several $100s worth of these very expensive meals ready to eat from the military. And that was all fine and dandy until a little mouse found his way into the bottom corner of that bag and started a mouse highway into the bottom of that bag. And I had no idea I had a mouse infestation because they were coming up from under the floor and going right into the bottom of the bag. And I didn't know it till I started smelling them, and then I finally tracked them down. And oh, the massive loss of food. It was such a waste. For somebody who was raised by Depression-era parents, it made me nauseous, not just the vermin, but the fact that I had wasted all of that food and money. I felt so awful. So that's when I went to doing a pantry instead of long-term food storage and processed foods. Now, having said that, I do currently live in a van down by the river, and I like to have as much food on hand as possible, but space as well as weight is an issue when you live in a mobile home, not a mobile home, but a home that is mobile, a home with wheels. So I have opted for some of that to use this freeze-dried, dehydrated food that typically backpackers will put in there in their backpack. This one is beef stew, and I believe this is an 11-year-old bag. So this bag has been thrown around for 11 years, and I would eat right out of it right now. I would. This is some of that food that rarely goes bad, if ever, and if you think it might go bad, you'll know immediately when you open the top, because you'll smell it. If it goes bad, it will start to turn. But you know, this freeze-dried, dehydrated food has a really long life. Some were putting 10 years as a expiration date on these, that they're good for 10 years. I would say that they're as good as long as they're good. As long as they taste good and everything looks good, I'd eat it. This freeze-dried process is pretty tough. Well, for instance, you can get that kind of freeze-dried product in an envelope, which doesn't last as long because of the envelope. Or you can get it in these big cans. Now, this is dehydrated, freeze-dried strawberry slices, and this has a shelf life of 30 years. So I will be an old man in my 80s before the shelf life of this strawberry starts to deteriorate. And that means it's going to be fresh for 30 years. And you could probably eat it indefinitely. If I was hungry and it was 31 years, I'd probably have some strawberries. So you have this kind of... And so I have some of these because of the long life, and I can put it up and not worry about it. And I'm getting old enough now that this is almost a longer expiration date than I've got. That this expiration date might still be viable when my expiration date runs out. Also, I think you shouldn't put up food unless you have a way of replenishing it. And so during World War II, everyone was encouraged to grow what they called a victory garden, where you grew vegetables and in your yard instead of grass. Instead of grass and roses, everyone pulled up their lawns and they planted vegetable gardens to help out with the rationing and the food, and just to create more and produce more. In the event of an emergency or a blackout or an EMP or a grid down scenario, golf courses will be uprooted and planted with seeds, so you better have some seeds. It helps if they're in a freeze-dried container. Now, I have heard that seeds could maintain viability for, some seeds for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100-year-old seed could germinate. It is possible, although it's not likely. This one is given a 5-year shelf life. So you need to plant these within 5 years. But these are heirloom vegetables. Always buy heirloom seeds. And heirloom just means that they're not the kind of hybrid, crossbred plants that may or may not produce the same kind of fruit if you planted the seeds, because they may be dual varieties that are crossbred, and you may only get half of the kind of fruit. You may have a completely different kind of fruit than the fruit that you're planting the seed from, where these will produce plants that produce the kind of fruit that you got. So if you got a zucchini that's an heirloom zucchini, its seeds will produce another heirloom zucchini plant just like the one that came off of, no problem. So get some heirloom seeds, get them in a number 10 can, in this kind of, long-term storage for a 5-year storage, and someone's knocking at my door. So I guess I'll let you go. You even get visitors down by the river. But yeah, you need to have some way of replenishing your pantry when your canned food and your dehydrated food and all your supplies run dry. And I'll tell you what, when it comes to food, I try to save way more than I would ever eat, because I'm a generous guy and I just can't say no to a hungry person. I don't know about you. So when it comes to prepping, more food is more better. So keep a pantry, keep a food supply on hand, and do the best you can, even if it's just buying one extra can a payday. If you got something, it is better than having nothing at all, and maybe it'll keep you out of the FEMA camp. God save our republic.